Welcome back, everyone. Oh my god. So, the Angel Secret Lair looks ridiculous. I am very excited about this product. I haven't actually bought cards in about 6 months, and I'm gonna buy this product. That's how excited for it I am. And not just because it's an Angel deck, but there's a lot of good value and high value reprints in this set. Cards that I need, like Commander's Plate and Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. Also, I just need another copy of Gisela. Gisela's gotten really expensive too, but beyond that, there is brand new art for 5 different cards in the set, Gisela and Bruna being 2 of them, and they also have new art for Brizella on the back, which I didn't capture here, but looks amazing. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're here to talk about upgrades that you can make, and so I guess first things first, here is the deck list. The thing that really struck me about this deck is that this deck is incredibly well built out of the box. All of the cards that I thought I was going to have to add, most of them are already in here. Like, Nykthos is like a must for mono white decks, and it's in here, currently listed at $31. It's very expensive. I have one in paper, and would very much like to have another. Emeria creeping up there too at $15, also in the deck. War Room, Bonder's Enclave, those are kind of the 2 that I add to like almost every deck that I play, and already in there. So I can't overstate, they did a really good job building this deck. I counted about 12 pieces of ramp, about 10 of removal, I think. The card draw was a little bit lackluster. Mono white, that's still a struggle, but I'll talk about some ways to address that as we go through things. But yeah, overall, out of the box, this deck is going to play really, really good. I'm going to go so far as to say this might be one of the most well-built precons ever sold. So just before we start talking about upgrades, the one thing I do want to mention is that if I personally were building a mono white deck, Gisela wouldn't be the commander for that deck. I personally would either go with Bruna in the command zone for the reanimation, or Giada because she's cheap and makes mana and does a lot of really good things. She carries equipment really well, which I like, which helps you get that early game value going. So for me personally, I would probably go for Giada, but I also like what Bruna does with the reanimation. Note that if you decide to do that, you're going to want to change the deck around a little bit. In particular, you'll want to cut all of the life gain cards. There is a pretty substantial life gain theme in this deck. So anyway, that's what I would do, but that being said, most of the changes that I'm recommending aren't really specific to Gisela and will help the deck no matter which commander you decide to run. So with that, let's get into it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the creatures, because talking about the creatures will kind of also allow us to talk about the strategies of the deck. So anyway, our first one is going to be Odric Lunarch Marshal. This is simply for spreading the keywords. This deck is going to have a lot of really good keywords on all of your creatures. If Brizella is in play, I think that's 4 keywords that get spread to everything and is just fantastic. Next up is Burnished Heart. This is going to be for the Emeria Shepherd combo, but it's also just a really good piece of ramp by itself. Importantly, it'll get your land count up, which is relevant to Emeria. And the nice thing is, it can just sit in your graveyard waiting for Emeria Shepherd to show up. Next up is Mother of Ruins. So I've played Brizella decks a few times on the channel, and also one pretty recently. I do recommend checking out my Easy Brizella video if you want to see a cute way to assemble Brizella really easily. Anyway, one of the things that comes up with trying to assemble Brizella is that you need a lot of protection because your opponents do not want you to have Brizella in play. And Mother of Ruins is just a really good, nice option that is very flexible and allows you to kind of protect, particularly when you're trying to meld them. Is a very scary moment. Basically, you're going to do a spot removal check at the table when you try to meld Brizella. So Mother of Ruins, very helpful for trying to protect against that. The next two, these are the 2 most underrated angels. Whenever I look at an angel list that someone sends me or I see one online, these are the 2 that people usually leave out. Most of the angels that exist do good things for you, like they reanimate your creatures, they give you protection. These 2 don't do so much for your board state, but they're absolutely backbreaking against your opponents. Instead of buffing yourself, it's more like putting a debuff on your opponents, and I've been running these 2 for a long time, and I have people groan a lot when they hit the battlefield. Angelic Arbiter forces them to choose between casting a spell or attacking, which generally means you're not going to get Craterhoofed or some sort of overrun type of play, which is fantastic. Chancellor of the Annex, on the other hand, is really good at cutting down value and people trying to play multiple spells every turn, but also the revealing it from your hand, I have had that be relevant. And what I like about Chancellor is it's not a hard lock, but it does slow your opponents down so they can't just run past you. And what's important with mono white Angels is that you don't have amazing kill speed, so you need to be able to sustain the game a little bit. And a really good way to do that is to slow your opponents down. So I would definitely run these two. Next up is Angelic Skirmisher. In general, Angelic Skirmisher is really good for combat decks. I just love that ability to choose the keywords that I need for each combat. So good. Anyway, this one's in here particularly for the lifelink because there is a lot of lifelink synergy currently in the deck. Next up is Karmic Guide. Karmic Guide is one, just really good, and two, it does have a combo line with Pyre of Heroes, which is you sacrifice Gisela to Pyre of Heroes, get Karmic Guide, bringing back Gisela, and then you have to pay the echo cost on Karmic Guide next turn. But that starts the daisy chain of you being able to do some really wild stuff with Pyre of Heroes. Next up is Cathar Commando. This is just a flexible piece of removal, and with enough reanimation in the deck, if something really bad is on the board, you'll have the ability to get this back and shoot something that might be important. So the next thing we're going to look at is the artifacts in the deck. First up, we have Thran Dynamo. Quite simply, it is the third best mana rock overall, and I just looked. They are really cheap right now. They're like under $1, so I'm probably going to buy like 20 of them because usually they hover around $4 or $5. Next up is Dowsing Dagger. This is another Commander replay staple. This helps with the ramp. It's just a fantastic way to get a lot of extra mana going very quickly into the game. There are certain situations where I like this better than Sword of the Animus. Like sometimes I just need that burst of mana. I will go Dowsing Dagger over Sword of the Animus. If I don't think I'm going to be able to get a lot of attacks through with Sword of the Animus, I might go Dowsing Dagger instead. So just a really good card. And as long as you keep the Lost Veil in play, your mana should be in pretty good shape for the rest of the game. Next up is Expedition Map. You have a Nykthos in this deck, which means you want to find that Nykthos. It's a really powerful card, so Expedition Map is going to help us do that. So next up we have another Commander replay staple, that's Mask of Memory. Quite simply, this is the best card draw available for combat decks. Every time you hit, you draw 2, discard 1. You get to look at a lot of cards. It's never usually threatening enough that someone wants to spend spot removal on it. It will occasionally get cleaned up by a Vandal Blast or Austere Command, but hopefully you've already generated the value you need by that point. But it's unbelievably good, and it's so cheap and so efficient. In a mono white deck, this is going to be my primary card draw, and I'm going to add several ways to tutor for this because it's that important that I want it in play. Similar to Mask of Memory, we have Rogue's Gloves. It's a little bit less good, but still reasonable here, especially if we're trying to stay on a budget. In general, you should be able to get Gisela through the early and mid game, so you should be able to pick up a few extra cards that way. If you have no budget at all, Sword of Fire and Ice, obviously much better, but it is quite a pricey card. Next up we have Pyre of Heroes, and this is a very interesting Magic card. This allows all kinds of crazy lines, which I started alluding to earlier. For example, sacrificing Gisela, getting Karmic Guide, bringing back Gisela. I've done some other stuff where you sacrifice a 6-drop to get a Maria Shepherd, then play a Plains, get that creature back. If that 6-drop happened to be like Dawnbreak Reclaimer, that'll reanimate another creature at the end step. If the sun is really shining on you, that creature you reanimate might be a Karmic Guide getting something else. I think you see what's going on. It's a really powerful card. And importantly, it's a tutor, so if you are trying to assemble Brazella, 6-drops are going to be helpful because they will get Bruna onto the battlefield. Next up we have Blackblader Forge. As I talked about, this deck does not kill particularly fast. Blackblader Forge is just going to help speed up the clock and allow us to kill our opponents much quicker. It'll open up Voltron wins as well. You might be able to get there with commander damage. And to that point, finishing power will be the struggle for this deck. Mono white just not known for closing games out super quickly. Next up we have a couple enchantments. First up is Angelic Renewal. I don't use this card a lot, but it is very cute. So if you have Brazella melded and it dies, you sacrifice Angelic Renewal and it'll bring back both halves unmelded. Which sure isn't as good as keeping Brazella together, but I do like that ability to get both pieces back because you don't care why they died, but we'll bring them both back, and then you'll have to wait for your turn again to be able to meld. But for a 2-mana enchantment that's like 25 cents, perfectly reasonable. Next up is Duelist Heritage. This is another one that's going to help us with that closing speed as well. Also, if there's a Mask of Memory on there, any other type of sword, we're going to be able to double up that value. And importantly, you can choose to say yes whenever an opponent attacks another opponent, and you're like, nah, I want to make this hurt a little bit. You double up the big green trampoline creature that's probably going at them, and they're going to feel it. Next up, we'll take a look at the spells in the deck. The first two we see here are some reanimation spells. Miraculous Recovery is ridiculous in that it is an instant speed reanimation effect, and it does put a +1/+1 counter on it, which is nice. Angels aren't the biggest, they tend to be mid-sized, so a little extra power is nice, but the main draw is the instant speed. You wait until all the board wipes are done, and then reanimate your best thing at the end step. And then life is good. Secondly, we have Ascend from Avernus. This is the best mass reanimate in mono white and is a very powerful late game play. It's probably not going to do a ton for you early, so you hope to not draw it in your opener, but it is a really nice thing to have late in the game, particularly when you have a number of angels in your graveyard. Next up, we see two more protection spells. Like I said, protection is going to be so important when trying to meld Brazella. People do not want you to have a Brazella. So Blacksmith Skill, fantastic. Faith Shield, also great. Faith Shield was my main go-to before Blacksmith Skill was printed. In general, Blacksmith Skill is a little bit better, but Faith Shield still has a lot of value. In particular, you can choose protection from a color, which means you can get unblockable. And in the case of a deck like this, something like a Butcher of Malakir can be very scary for you. It can be hard to attack past that, so Faith Shield gives you a little way around that, which is nice. In addition to protection from Blasphemous Act and other damage-based stuff. Next up, we have a Settle the Wreckage. This is for protecting ourselves. For many years, I've championed Comeuppance. I do notice that people are running a lot of protection effects. Creatures get indestructible for a lot of different reasons now, and Settle the Wreckage gets around that. And then next we see two Equipment Tutors, also Commander Replay staples. So like I said, Mask of Memory and Sword of the Animist and Dowsing Dagger are going to be like the three go-tos in this deck for the early game. Those will set you up so you can have a good mid and good late game. And importantly, Steel Shaper's Gift was just reprinted, so it's down to about $5 from the, I don't know, 20 that it was up to for a while. So that's another card that I will be buying a lot of. But yeah, in the early game, get Sword of the Animist, Dowsing Dagger, and Mask of Memory based on what your needs are. In the late game, that's where you're going to want either your Black Blade or Forge, maybe a Commander's Plate, but any of that type of stuff. Next, we see a Gift of Estates. For the longest time, this is about the closest thing that white had to card draw. It is fantastic card advantage, and if you're casting this on turn 2 or 3, you're going to have all of your land drops lined up through probably at least turn 5, 6, maybe 7. And so those are the main changes that I recommend to this deck. But if you have no budget, here's some beyond the budget options for the deck if you want to make it even better than that. The three big ones are going to be Akroma's Will, Teferi's Protection, and Sword of Feast and Famine. These will just make your deck better. You will win more games if these are in your deck. They're powerful staples for a reason, and they're expensive for a reason because they make you win more games. Next up, we see even more protection. Both great cards. I just ran out of budget for these. Sajiri Shelter, fantastic at $1. It was like just barely putting me over the budget. And Guardian of Faith is a couple dollars now, but what's important about Guardian of Faith is that in the current setup for this deck with a lot of those angel tokens that you're going to be generating, Guardian of Faith is really helpful because you can keep those tokens alive, where something like an Eerie Interlude or Ghostway won't. So it might be worth thinking about Guardian of Faith for that reason. Also, same sort of thing with Brazella. Once it's melded, you won't have to worry about trying to remeld it and stuff like that. And I really wanted to get this card in the deck, but about $5 to $6, it just wasn't fitting. Blind Obedience is so well positioned right now. If you think about what most people are doing, it's playing creatures and making treasures. This slows both of those down a lot. So I highly, highly recommend putting a Blind Obedience in the deck. Next is Skull Clamp. Again, mono white doesn't draw super well. Skull Clamp is a really nice, easy, repeatable card draw option, and it combos really well with Oketra's Monument, which is already in the deck, which is great. And finally, True Conviction. I just ran out of budget for this one, around $3. Again, this is about speeding up the clock and being able to kill opponents once you have a decent board state. So anyway, yeah, the main keys to this deck are going to be get some equipment, get some equipment tutors, get early value going with Gisela. Then after that, you get into your bigger stuff of trying to assemble Brazella or dropping some of your bigger, nastier angels, and you'll want to try to hold up protection and keep them protected or have some reanimation available for them. And as I talked about a little bit in the video, there's some powerful stacks pieces that will help slow your opponents down a lot. So if you find that your opponents are just going way faster than you, you'll want to up the amount of board wipes and throw a little bit more stacks into the deck, and that should slow opponents down to your speed, and then you can play your own game. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.